In the spring of 1970, Ruth Ansell, a 34-year-old widow farming her dead father's 240 acres of black ground outside the town of Elkhart in Logan County, Illinois, walked out to her planter with a bucket of seed corn she had shelled by handoff ears her father had chosen one at a time for 40 years, and she filled the boxes with it. And the men at the elevator laughed at her for planting the last open pollinated field in the county. They called her the Mule Corn Woman, and they laughed about it all through the wet, warm summer that followed, right up until the morning the blight came north on the wind and every hybrid field for 30 miles turned brown on the stalk but hers. She had not gone simple in her grief. She had read a thing written in her father's own pencil that not one of those men had the patience to read. You would not have picked her out of a church pew. She was a lean, plain woman with her hair pulled back into a bun that came loose by noon, and hands that were already going hard across the knuckles from the work. She wore her husband's old field coat with the sleeves turned up twice, and she walked her ground slow, like a woman who has buried 2 people in 3 years and learned that the land does not stop to grieve with you. Her husband had gone under a tractor in the fall of 1967. Her father, August Ansell, had followed him 2 winters later, quiet, in the front room, with his seed notebook still on the sill where he could see the crib from his chair. Everyone in that county knew what a cornfield was supposed to be in 1970. It was supposed to be hybrid. The new seed came in sacks with bright red running horses printed on the side, and the salesman swore it would put half again as many bushels in the crib as the old open-pollinated dent corn the grandfathers had grown, and mostly they were telling the truth. A man who planted his grandfather's saved seed in 1970 was a man who had quit, or a man who could not read a ledger, or a man too poor to buy the future 1 sack at a time. The old ramble-tall variable corn had a name in the coffee shop. They called it mule corn. Half a crop, they said, off a museum piece. And here was a widow filling her boxes out of a wooden crib. The reason was in the notebook. August Ansell had kept it since before the First War. A hand-sewn stockman's book in an oilcloth cover, gone soft as chamois. And every fall of his life he had walked his crib by lamplight and chosen the ears he would save and written down why. He chose for a strong shank so the ear would not drop in a wind. He chose for a tight husk so the mold and the earworm could not get in. He chose for stalks that stood when the neighbors went flat. He chose the ear off a plant that had shrugged off a dry August, and the ear off one that had stood through a wet one, and he never once chose 2 ears that were the same. There was a line he had written near the front and underlined twice, and Ruth had read it so many times that winter that the pencil had gone gray under her thumb. Never plant one kind of anything. His mother had told him that in German on a boat, and he had farmed by it for 40 years, and it had kept them fed through the dust years when whole townships blew away. Ruth understood only about half of why it worked. She understood that her father's corn was not one corn. It was 1,000 slightly different plants that happened to make a crop together, tall and short, early and late. A crowd and not a regiment. She did not have the science for the rest of it. Nobody did that spring. Not the university, not the seed company, not the smiling men who sold the future in a sack. What none of them knew, what nobody in American agriculture knew in the spring of 1970, was that nearly every hybrid in the whole corn belt now carried one identical hidden weakness. The same borrowed part bred into seed after seed after seed, a sameness her father's rambling crib had never had. But that is the end of the story, and I have gotten ahead of it. Stay with Ruth. In the spring, she only had the notebook and the crib and the nerve. Let me take you to the elevator that April, because that is where it started. She backed the truck to the loading door to buy her fertilizer, and there were 4 or 5 men leaning on the scale house wall in the sun, and the first one to see the seed corn in her truck bed was a big, loud man named Verl Pruitt, who farmed the section across the road and had wanted her father's ground for 20 years. Verl looked in the bed, and he saw the ears, whole ears, as seed used to travel before the sacks, and he got a grin on him, and he said it loud so the others would turn. "Ruth," he said, "tell me you are not putting your grandpa's mule corn in the ground in the year of our Lord 1970. And they all had a laugh at that, an easy morning laugh, and Ruth loaded her sacks and said nothing, because her father had taught her that a person who is explaining is a person who is losing. The salesman came a week later. His name was Thorne, and he sold for the biggest of the hybrid houses, and he drove a clean two-tone car down a lane that had never seen a clean car, and he had a way of saying a woman's first name like he had known her since school. He had already signed most of the township. That was his trick, and it was a good one. He wrote the seed on credit against the fall crop, so a man paid nothing in the spring and everything in October, and in a good year it made the farmer money, and it made Thorne money, and everybody shook hands. He sat at Ruth's kitchen table with his hat on his knee, and he told her kindly, as you would tell a child a hard thing, that the ground she was standing on was going to fall behind. "The county will pull away from you by 20 bushels an acre," he said, "and the bank will notice. I can have a truck out with the new seed by Thursday, and you will not owe a cent until the corn is sold." He was not cruel about it. That was the thing about Thorne. He believed every word, and he was mostly right, and being mostly right is the most dangerous thing a man can be. Ruth thanked him and walked him to his clean car and did not sign. She planted the 80 acres in the old corn in the last week of April, and she planted the rest of the ground in hybrid like everybody else, because she was not a fool and she had a note at the bank. And that is a thing the coffee shop never understood about her. She was not making a stand. She was buying insurance the only way she knew how, out of a crib the way her father had bought it, keeping one field of her own that no catalog had a page for. A neighbor boy who came to help her string fence watched her shell the seed off the ears by hand into the planter box and asked her why she did not just buy it in a sack like his daddy. "Because a sack is all one thing, son," she said, and handed him a cob to throw for the dog. I want to tell you about the field day in June, because it is the part that would have made you angry for her. The extension office held it on Thorne's demonstration plot, the one he seeded for free every year so the whole county could come and admire the future, and the county agent, a young man named Elwood Coyle with a clipboard and a college pen, walked the rows and told 40 farmers that the new seed was the finest genetic material ever put in Illinois dirt. Somebody asked him, half to be mean, what he thought of the Ansel place and its mule corn. And Coyle, who was a decent enough man and only saying what his whole education had told him, looked out over the rows and said it plain. "That field is a shame," he said. "It is a good woman farming yesterday. In 10 years, there will not be an open pollinated field left in the state, and the country will be better fed for it." Ruth was not there. Verl Pruitt made sure to tell her every word of it at the elevator the next week, laughing as a kindness. Her corn came up ragged. That was the honest truth of it, and she never pretended otherwise. Her 80 acres in the old dent corn came up uneven, some plants knee-high, and some to her waist by the same week. Tall and short, and every green in between, a field that looked from the road like a crowd milling at a fair. Thorne's hybrids came up like soldiers, every plant the same height on the same day, dark and even and beautiful, rank on rank of them, so uniform you could sight down a row like a rifle barrel. Any man driving the blacktop that June could see with his own eyes which field was the future and which was the past, and every man who drove it was sure. Then the settlement came, and the fall before had left her thin, and this is the low place in the story. Her old corn made less. It always would have. That was never the argument. When she hauled the previous crop and her books came due, her check at the elevator was the smallest posted on the board that October, and Verl Pruitt read the number out loud so the scale house could hear it. And Ruth folded it into her coat and drove home with her jaw set. The banker, a careful gray man named Mr. Ledbetter, drove out to sit at her table and told her, gently, that the note on the place needed a bigger crop to service it, and that the modern seed was how a person made a bigger crop, and that a widow alone could not afford sentiment about a wooden box in the yard. Thorne came behind him as a friend and offered to take the old crib corn off her hands and trade her out even for a truckload of hybrid, so she would not have to look at it any more. He meant it as a mercy. That was the worst of it. He meant well. She carried the hybrid contract to the kitchen table one night late, and she smoothed it flat under the lamp. And she got out her father's notebook and laid it beside the paper, and she read the underlined line one more time, the rule about never trusting a field that was all the same. Then she opened the stove, and she put the contract in on the coals and shut the door, and she sat there in the kitchen while it burned, a thin woman in a dead man's coat, betting everything she had left on the word of a dead man she trusted more than a live one. And out over the Gulf States that same autumn and into the next spring, riding the wind north, field by field. Something was already moving that no seed catalog had a page for, and not one man in that county had thought to count it. The summer of 1970 came in hot, and it came in wet, and that is the weather a fungus prays for. It started in the south, in Florida and along the Gulf. In the winter, small, a leaf spot the plant pathologists had seen before and thought they understood. But this was not the old blight. This was a new race of it, and it had learned a new trick, and it came up the country on the warm, wet wind that summer like nothing anyone farming had ever seen. Southern cornleaf blight, race T, they would call it later when they had a name. In July it reached Illinois. It came into the hybrid fields first, because the hybrid fields were what it had learned to open. Little lesions showed on the lower leaves, tan, the shape and color of a cigarette burn laid on green cloth, a few here and a few there, and a man could walk his rows in the morning and tell himself it was nothing. By the next week the lesions had run together and climbed leaf to leaf, and the lower canopy was going gray. By the week after that whole fields were browning from the ground up, the lesions running down the husk and into the shank, the ears themselves going soft and molding on the standing stalk, a smell of rot lifting off the bottoms at the crossroads where you had to slow for the stop sign. And it took the uniform fields the fastest, because they were uniform. Thorne's demonstration plot, the beautiful, even one the whole county had admired at the field day, the one you could sight down like a rifle barrel, went brown to the fence line in 11 days. Every plant the same, every plant with the same door, and the fungus had the key to that door, and it walked through 100,000 plants at a time and never once found a lock it did not fit. Verl Pruitt's section across the road went the same way. The combine sat parked at the ends of the fields with nothing worth putting them into. A sixth of the corn crop of the whole nation went down that year, township after township turning the color of a paper sack, the worst plant epidemic the country had ever had. And the men who had bought the future on credit stood at the fences in August and watched it rot where it stood. And Ruth Ansell's 80 acres of ragged mule corn stood green as June in the middle of it. Not perfect. Green, a lesion here and there on this plant or that, one plant sick while the plant beside it was clean, a short one hit and the tall one next to it standing untouched, because they were not the same plant, and the fungus that opened the one could not open the other. Her field was not a regiment with one order to disobey. It was a crowd, 1,000 different doors, and the blight that ran a mile through the hybrids in a week could not run through what was not uniform. It got a plant and stopped. It got another and stopped. It never got the field. Here is the thing none of them had known, the thing withheld from all of them, the salesman and the agent and the university and the widow herself. Nearly every hybrid in America that year had been built on one same source of a thing bred in to make the seed cheaper to produce. One identical borrowed part, the same in the Red Horse sack and the sack beside it, and 10,000 fields between here and Texas. It was a single door, and the new blight had learned that one door. And so it could open the entire modern crop of a continent all at once. Her father's corn had never been given that one door. It had 1,000, all different, most of them locked, and no fungus alive that summer had the key to more than a few. He had not known the science. He had known one older thing and written it in pencil: never plant one kind of anything. They posted the county yields at the elevator that October, as they always did, on the board by the scale house window where anybody could read them. County average, 31 bushels an acre, and below that the ones that had been abandoned to the combine's teeth, zeros down the column. And near the top of the board, in the scale man's blocky hand, one line: Ansell, 82 bushels an acre, the only sound corn for 30 miles, standing where the laughing had started. The men came to the fence one at a time, as they always do. The first to cross was a boy, Verl Pruitt's youngest, who came up her lane on foot one evening with his cap in both hands and would not meet her eye. "My father didn't send me," he said. "He doesn't know I'm here." And he asked her, plain, "Would you sell us some of the crib corn for seed in the spring? There's talk the hybrid seed itself is carrying the same weakness, and there won't be clean seed to buy anywhere. My daddy's too proud to come ask." Ruth gave the boy a cup of coffee on the step. "Tell your father to come himself," she said. Verley came. It cost him, and she let it cost him, but she did not gloat, because her father had taught her that a person who gloats has traded being right for feeling right, and they are not the same coin. Verl stood in the yard turning his hat, and finally he got it out. "You were right, Ruth," he said. "You and your daddy both." She looked at him a long moment. "My father was right," she said. "I was just the one still keeping the crib." Thorne came last, which surprised no one. He came up the clean lane in the clean car, and he did not have the easy way with her first name any more. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in both hands now, and he made his offer. "I'll give you 10 times the price of grain for what's in that crib," he said. "It isn't grain now, Ruth. It's seed, and there's nothing clean to plant for 30 miles. It was the same corn he had offered to haul away as a mercy the winter before. The soundest open-pollinated seed in the middle of the country, and every farm that had laughed needed it in the ground by April, or it would have nothing to put there. Ruth sold it to them. She sold seed to every farm in the township that had a name for her, and she sold it fair, and she kept back the best ears the way her father had. Walking the crib by lamplight in November, choosing for the strong shank and the tight husk, choosing the plant that had shrugged off the wet year, and writing down in the oilcloth book why. The university men came in the winter with a camera and photographed the crib and the ragged field and the notebook. 2 years later, when the whole country was still cleaning up from what the blight had done, and the government had written a thick report on how a nation had let its entire corn crop come to rest on one identical hidden part. There was a bulletin that taught the lesson to every farm state in the Union, and the Ansel place in Logan County was in it. The small green field in the Brown County, the example. The word they used was uniformity, and the danger of it, and it was the exact danger a woman's father had underlined twice in pencil before the First War, in German, in a hand that grew fainter every year she read it. Ruth Ansel farmed that ground another 30 years and never again put in a field that was all the same. And if you have ever kept one old thing back when every voice you trusted told you it was foolish, one seed, one skill, one way your people did a thing that the whole bright modern world had decided to throw away, then you already know why this story is worth telling. And you know it in your own hands. Keep something of your own in the crib. A crop that is all one thing can be lost all one way, in 1 week on one wind. But you cannot lose in a single stroke what you never made the same. Keep something back. No year can take everything from a person who did.